Welcome to Gunkel Tarot. My name is Brian Griffin. Today I'm doing a VR response to Simon's updated All About Tarot 2022 tag. So let's begin. Okay, first question. My first deck and how it came to me. My first deck, which I still own, is the Morgan Greer Tarot. I purchased it in 1980. There's the back. This is a version that was still printed by Morgan Press or Morgan & Morgan. US Games took over distribution, and later when US Games started printing it, they narrowed the card stock by about 1/8 of an inch. Generally speaking, taken off of this side. I do have photographs comparing my card and the US Games versions on possibly my blog, otherwise my Gunkel Tarot website. I'll try to remember to link to it. So how it came to me, I don't have any specific recollection of knowing about tarot or not knowing about tarot. Certainly not something that was talked about or feared in the family. But I knew some sense of it. And then I started dating Isaac, and he had the yellow box Rider-Waite Smith, and I loved the idea of tarot. I did not really appreciate that artwork, so we went to the occult shop on Queen Street West in Toronto, which has since moved to many other places, if it even still exists. Looked at the options they had. There was perhaps a dozen decks at most available back then in Toronto, and the Morgan Greer is the one that caught my eye. And in fact, I now have two copies. A year or two later, I purchased a second copy, which I use for client readings. The one I showed you is the first deck I bought, and it is strictly my personal reading deck. So that's tarot and how it came to me. Number two, my latest deck purchase and what perhaps it says about how my tastes have changed. My latest deck, I doubt very much it'll be my last deck. My latest deck purchase is the Sweeney Tarot, which I have a couple of different videos about on my channel. It's published through the Game Crafter Print on Demand by an artist who happens to now live in the same urban area that I do, although I have not yet encountered them face to face. There are a lot of similarities between this and the Morgan Greer. It's a little more close up front to the action even than the Morgan Greer, which to me tends to be a little closer to the action than the Rider-Waite. It's modern, not super modern, sort of timeless, you might think, because it's sort of what we're used to. Intense colors, which I like. The Morgan Greer I like, even though it's not as intense colors. It seemed to be, to me, more natural colors than the Rider-Waite Smith, which is sort of draws on the printing technology of the time, etc. So this is the Sweeney Tarot. As to what this reveals about my changing tastes, I agree with Chrissy Bentley in her reply to this VR, where it's perhaps less a changing taste as learning and understanding our taste. As I said before, the first deck, when I got it, there were not a lot of choices. There was the original Rider-Waite, there was J.J. Smith, Swiss, the Morgan Greer, the Aquarian, Medieval Scapini came out a couple of years later. There were US Games was just starting to get into many decks. So have my taste changed? It looks like they're not that different. Those are Oracle decks. The tarot decks are down there. I just can't really see. I have about 3 dozen tarot and less than 2 dozen non-tarot. So there's a reasonably broad selection of decks. So it's hard to say specifically how my tastes have changed, if they have. Question 3, why tarot? I'm a photographer. Why photography? Why poetry? Why any art form? Why whatever? Tarot makes sense to me. It helps me see things that I can't otherwise see. So it's It's just something I do. Number 4, tarot pet peeves. I have 3 to make note of. One is when people say you do it this way, and the problem is I receive it as you must. And in most of life, but definitely in the mystical arts, you must is the antithesis of mystical arts. There are traditions that can be respected. There can be different ways of doing things. So I prefer people who say, this is how I, whatever. So this is how I calculate. Simple example, birth cards or year cards. Generally speaking, it's numerological calculation for the major arcana card that represents your life or the year, etc. And there are various ways of doing it. Some people pull 1 card, some people use 2 cards or 3 cards. There's different ways of calculating it. There are people who say that they use that card for the calendar year in which the birthday is set. Other people start on the birthday, run to the next. Whatever works for you, works for you. Don't tell me how I do it. I want to hear how you do it and perhaps why or what insight. And I may adapt, I may adopt, I may change, I may ignore, and that's fine. Likewise, when I talk about my practices. Number 2, symbology. Symbology is the study, a large overview theoretical study about how the human animal uses symbols and symbolism. When you look at a card, it has symbols, and what those symbols mean or can mean or mean to you is symbolism. Symbology is not symbolism. And yes, I realize that this, in addition to reflecting the fact I grew up in a house where language was considered very important, is also a reflection of that middle class white Canadian culture. It's ableists. There's a lot of things about language that are inherently a problem. The person who takes time to send a message should take time to send the message as clearly as possible. And so when you realize that people are hearing things and not getting your message, perhaps they just don't understand because they can't, but perhaps you need to rethink how you send the message. So ableism aside, symbolism is what the symbols represent. Third pet peeve is the term system to mean the various traditions of tarot. Tarot is a system of card divination. So is Kipper, so is Lenormand, and so is all the freeform things like angel cards, animal decks, etc. The system is tarot. There are traditions within tarot which are to a degree artistic. So we have the Marseille tradition, and then we have the RWS and the Thoth. And then we have people sort of doing bits and pieces of whatever. So the system is tarot. And privilege speaks. So my favorite spread, for a simple thing, 3 cards, everyone's, I think, in their videos talked about that. 3 card spread is very useful. It's very wonderful. For something a little more complex, I love the Grand Cross 9 card spread. Some people lay it out so you have a row of 5 cards and then another row intersecting it, which is 4 cards, end up with 4 equal arms, 2, 2, 2, 2, 1 in the middle. It's wonderful for pairing things. There are people who like to take the row and move it, the cross row up 1, so it's the first card and then the second card's the row, and then down below. More traditional Christian imagery, not as useful for pairing, but that's it. In fact, I have a video about the Grand Cross on my channel somewhere, and some examples of readings I have using it in my Gunkel Tarot offering. So, but I also want to do an honorable mention to Robin of Toadstool Tarot's video response, where he talked about one he called, I believe he called it the upside down pyramid or the inverted pyramid, where he lays out a row starting either 5 or 4 cards, and then the row below 1 less, then 1 less, 1 less, etc. So you end up with a triangle, an upside down or inverted triangle. And then he says you can look at pairs, but you also can look at triples. So 2 cards and the one below it form a triangle. I loved his description, and so I took his verbal description and sketched it out. And on Instagram, I have a diagram of my understanding of that. I haven't used it yet. It's one of those things where you could could theoretically get into analysis paralysis because even with just the four cards on the top row down, so you have 10 cards, you have 6 pairs and 6 triples. And if you add the fifth row, that many more, but it's intriguing, and I always like exploring new things. Number 6, system. Previous commentary aside, generally speaking, my cards are Rider-Waite Smith to the extent that they're any system. Urban Tarot is Toth. The Patrick Valenza's Triunfo de la Luna's, his takes sort of on a Marseille. I mean, it's a tip deck, so that's more Marseille, but his art is his art. Number 7, tarot rituals. I have a very few. They're very minimal and they're private. Number 8, do I use tarot for divination or introspection? I use it for introspection, intuition. To me, divination, as in fortune telling, future predicting, we have to recognize the model of meteorology, where they look at patterns, they look at history, they look at influences, and they give you a percentage chance, of like 90% chance of rain, but that's not 100%, and even if it's 100%, that doesn't tell you necessarily how heavy, how long it's going to last. There are often weather patterns that are big, and then there are localized patterns. So predicting the future it's not divining, it's not an oracle saying this is what will happen because that says the future's written. It's not. But there are tendencies. So with that in mind, I tend to use it for introspection, intuition, with a touch of divination. Number 9, significator. I don't use a significator. I never understood why you take a card out of the deck. Used as significators are often court cards, but they're always a card from the deck, which means there's a card that has a purpose, that has an intention, that has symbolism, and you're taking it out of use. That's the primary concern. I also don't understand this idea of taking a significator, especially a court card, based on the physical description of the querent. Whether it's the age, whether it's the presumed gender, whether it's hair color, etc. That's so focused on the physical, and tarot is so much more than the physical. It's looking at what's inside of us, and so a significator based on the outside is the antithesis of that. So I don't significate. 10, my most expensive tarot spend. The most expensive deck I bought to date is the Spirit Keeper's Tarot. It was $75 for the deck, and it was $50 additional to print out hard copies of the Book of Maps and the coil-bound workbooks. It's not something I can leave on the tablet and use. It just... Number 11, unicorn deck. They're all unicorn decks, or I have no unicorn decks. My life has been arranged now in a way that uses minimal financial resources. I work part-time. I'm on Social Security, and some of this is a reality to physical limitations, physical and mental health issues. So it's external, but it's also internal because I did a stint of just over a decade of working as a high-paid, moderately high-paid, high-pressure account manager position, and there were many things I loved about it, but it reminded me of all the worst ills of consumer capitalism. And so, I mean, I'm not saying I'm a minimalist because I offer my designs on a print-on-demand shop. So I recognize the limitations of consumer capitalism, and I also have designed my life to function within it but with less damage to my psyche. So they're all unicorn decks because my rule right now is I will not buy and cannot afford to buy another deck until I rehome one of the, over here, the 7 decks here that need to be rehomed. And once they're rehomed, then I can buy another deck. 12, lessons learned from tarot. Tarot has helped me do inner reflection, shadow work, etc., which all has helped me understand how little I know about myself. how little any of us know about ourselves, probably, but certainly in my case. Childhood abuse issues, generalized anxiety disorder, dissociative amnesia, PTSD, continuous PTSD, and other alphabet soup things. There's an awful lot I don't know about myself, and the tarot has helped me understand that, helped me find some of it, and remind me on a regular basis that other people are often in a similar situation, and kindness is really all I have to offer them in a lot of cases. So that's number 12. 13, tarot dinner party guests. For me, the guest of honor would be Jordan of Sincerely the Tarot on Instagram, and then Stephen Bright and Cassandra Snow. 3 people from my time frame, from current time. I believe all 3 of them are queer identified, or aspects of the alphabet identified. Fascinating people. 1 from England and 2 from the U.S., 1 from the West Coast, 1 who was born in the state I'm in now and lives in the Midwest. A variety of tarot experiences and a wide variety of life experiences. So that would be, to me, a fascinating dinner. Great conversation, tarot, non-tarot, life, the whole gamut. So that is my response to Simon of the Hermit Cave, All About Tarot 2022. Thank you.